Welcome to Church History Insights and Questions with me, David Eaton. This is episode 7. It's on the Book of Mormon translation. How did Joseph Smith translate the Book of Mormon? What did Joseph Smith say about it? In the preface to the 1830 edition of the Book of Mormon, Joseph Smith wrote, quote, "I would inform you that I translated the book by the gift and power of God." When pressed for specifics about the process of translation, Joseph repeated on several occasions that it had been done by the gift and power of God, and once added, quote, "It was not intended to tell the world all the particulars of the coming forth of the Book of Mormon." This is taken from Church Conference in Orange County, Ohio, in October 25th, 26, 1831. What did Terrell Givens say? Well, firstly, who is Terrell Givens? You probably know him. He's a senior research fellow at the Neal A. Maxwell Institute of Religious Scholarship at Brigham Young University. Until 2019, he was a professor of literature and religion at the University of Richmond, where he held the James A. Bostwick Chair in English. He did graduate work in intellectual history at Cornell and earned a PhD in comparative literature from the University of North Carolina, working with Greek, German, Spanish, Portuguese, and English languages and literature. He's a prolific author. He's written, I think, over 20 books, and at least half a dozen of those are written with his wife, Fiona Givens. And he wrote in his book, By the Hand of Mormon, he wrote this, quote, "The naked implausibility of gold plates, seer stones, and warrior angels finds little by way of scientific corroboration. But attributing to a young farm boy the 90-day dictated and unrevised production of a 500-page narrative that incorporates sophisticated literary structures, remarkable old world parallels, and some 300 references to chronology and 700 to geography with virtually perfect self-consistency is problematic as well." Close quote. Just a quick aside, Terrell Givens mentions 90 days. Scholarship consensus seems to put this period anything from 65 to 90 days. So the 90 days is pretty much on the outside of that spectrum. And according to John W. Welch, he said, quote, "Oliver arrived in Harmony as the sun was going down on Sunday the 5th of April 1829. After a day for Oliver to get settled, Joseph began translating on Tuesday, April the 7th, with Oliver as his scribe. The translation was a staggering achievement. It was completed within 85 days, from 7th of April to the 30th of June. Of course," this is John Welch speaking, "of course, not all of that time was spent working on the translation. The prophet and his scribes also took time to eat, to sleep, to seek employment, once for money when supplies ran out, to receive the Aaronic and Melchizedek priesthoods, to make at least one, and possibly two, trips to Colesville, 30 miles away, to convert and baptize Hiram and Samuel Smith, who came to Harmony at that time, to receive and record 13 revelations that are now sections of the Doctrine and Covenants, to move from Harmony to Fayette, to acquire the Book of Mormon copyright, to preach a few days and baptize several near Fayette, to experience manifestations with the 3 and 8 witnesses, and to begin making arrangements for the Book of Mormon's publication." John Welch concludes, "Conservatively estimated, this leaves 65 or fewer working days on which the prophet and his scribes could have translated. That works out to be an average of 8 pages per day." End of quote. John Welch, professor of law at Brigham Young University's J. Reuben Clark School, and he was formerly president of the Foundation for Ancient Research and Mormon Studies, FARMS. What did the church essay say, and what does the church say? This is a quote from the essay. "Most of the accounts speak of Joseph's use of the Urim and Thummim. either the interpreter's or the seer stone, and many accounts refer to his use of a single stone. According to these accounts, Joseph placed either the interpreter's or the seer stone in a hat, pressed his face into the hat to block out extraneous light, and read aloud the English words that appeared on the instrument. Close quote. What did Emma say? Joseph's wife Emma explained that she frequently wrote, day after day, at a small table in their house in Harmony, Pennsylvania. She described Joseph sitting with his face buried in his hat with the stone in it, and dictating hour after hour, with nothing between us. He had neither manuscript nor book to read from. Close quote. Later, Emma told her son, Joseph Smith III, who in turn later went on to lead the reorganized Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, which subsequently changed its name to be the Community of Christ. Emma told her son, Joseph Smith III, quote, "The Book of Mormon is of divine authenticity. I have not the slightest doubt of it. I am satisfied that no man could have dictated the writing of the manuscripts unless he was inspired. For, when acting as his scribe, your father would dictate to me for hour after hour, and when returning after meals or after interruptions, he would at once begin where he had left off, without either seeing the manuscript or having any portion of it read to him." Close quote. That's taken from the last testimony of Sister Emma from the Saints Herald, October the 1st, 1879. So quite some considerable time after the events. So Emma is recalling from that distance in time the events that she witnessed herself firsthand. What did a contemporary of Joseph Smith say? A Palmyra newspaper published the earliest known account of the translation in August 1829. Jonathan Hadley, a Palmyra printer who may have spoken with Joseph Smith about translation, claimed that the plates were found with a huge pair of spectacles, and that by placing the spectacles in a hat and looking into it, Smith could, he said so at least, interpret these characters. That's taken from an article called Golden Bible in the Palmyra Freeman, printed on August the 11th, 1829, which is about the same time or as the Book of Mormon was getting printed. What did Martin Harris say? Another scribe, Martin Harris, sat across the table from Joseph Smith and wrote down the words Joseph dictated. Harris later related that as Joseph used the seer stone to translate, sentences appeared. Joseph read those sentences aloud, and after penning the words, Harris would say, "Written." An associate who interviewed Harris recorded him saying that Joseph possessed a seer stone by which he was enabled to translate as well as from the Urim and Thummim, and for convenience he then used the seer stone. This is taken from one of the three witnesses in Deseret Evening News, December 13th, 1881. Again, this is a long time after the events that are being written about, and so Martin Harris will be relying upon his memory of those events when he records this. What did David Whitmer say? Speaking in 1993, Russell M. Nelson said, quote, "The details of this miraculous method of translation are still not fully known, yet we do have a few precious insights." David Whitmer wrote, quote, "Joseph Smith would put the seer stone into a hat and put his face in the hat, drawing it closely around his face to exclude the light, and in the darkness the spiritual light would shine. A piece of something resembling parchment would appear, and on that appeared the writing. One character at a time would appear, and under it was the interpretation in English. Brother Joseph would read off the English to Oliver Cowdery, who was his principal scribe, and when it was written down and repeated to Brother Joseph to see if it was correct, then it would disappear, and another character with the interpretation would appear. Thus the Book of Mormon was translated by the gift and power of God, and not by any power of man. End of quote. This is David Whitmer in his pamphlet or booklet called An Address to All Believers in Christ, which was printed in Richmond, Missouri in 1887. Michael Hubbard Mackay, who is he? Well, Michael Hubbard Mackay is an associate professor at Brigham Young University and a former historian for the Joseph Smith Papers Project. He is the author of Sacred Space, Exploring the Birthplace of Mormonism, and co-author of Joseph Smith's Seer Stones. Michael Hubbard Mackay summarized some of the main theories about how the Book of Mormon came to be through translation. So as we look at how the Book of Mormon was translated, there are quite a lot of different theories about how it could have been done. I think it's probably true to say that nobody knows for sure exactly how it was done, but here are 6 theories that Michael Hubbard Mackay talks us through very briefly. Number 1, textual linguistic. Royal Skousen suggests that Joseph read the translation from Seer Stones. This theory involves a tight control level of involvement. Number 2, metaphysical. Samuel Brown argues that Joseph transformed human beings and worlds in his translation. This theory involves a loose control level of involvement. Loose in the sense that Joseph was free to transform some of the concepts that he was receiving into language that was known to him and in a way that related to his surroundings. Number 3, realist naturalist. William Davis argues that Joseph was capable of producing the text himself. This theory involves a secular level of involvement, i.e. Joseph wrote it himself. Number 4, anti-naturalist. John Welch, who we referred to previously, explains that the Book of Mormon can be viewed as a demonstrable miracle, suggesting that Joseph was incapable of producing the book in 72 days. This theory involves a tight control level of involvement. Number 5, cognitive. Brant Gardner thinks the Book of Mormon could have first come to Joseph naturally and then emerged as a series of thoughts and language. This theory involves a tight stroke loose control, a bit of both, in other words, level of involvement. And finally, number 6, automatic writing. Anne Tavez suggests that the Book of Mormon text came to Joseph automatically and rapidly. This theory involves a tight control level of involvement. What about Grant Hardy? What does he say? Well, who is Grant Hardy? Grant Hardy is a professor of history and religious studies at the University of North Carolina. He has a BA in ancient Greek from Brigham Young University and a PhD in Chinese language and literature from Yale. He has authored Understanding the Book of Mormon, a reader's guide from the Oxford University Press, as well as the introduction for Royal Skousen's recent Yale edition of the Book of Mormon. He has also edited the Book of Mormon, a reader's edition, Enduring Ties. So Grant Hardy asks, how much of Joseph Smith can we see in the Book of Mormon? So this is a question that comes up a lot, and many people feel that as they read the Book of Mormon, they can see a lot of Joseph Smith's 19th century milieu in it, and so this is a question that Grant Hardy is asking. A, did he produce a translation through miraculous means that bears traces of his own words, his own concepts, and his own understanding? Or B, was a pre-existing text given to him by revelation, a text that would in turn reflect the mind of its celestial translator or translators? So we're going to look at these two, A and B, in a little bit more detail here, and try to understand what factors are involved in both of these two sort of main theories. We're going to start with the Joseph-produced text. And these are some of the reasons why Grant Hardy says that Joseph might have produced the text. So the non-standard grammar, repetitions, and awkwardness of the original dictation. In many ways, the Book of Mormon, according to Grant Hardy, seems like the sort of work that a young, religiously enthusiastic but poorly educated New York farmer might produce. The limited vocabulary of about 5,600 words, 2,225 root words in English, phrases and concepts, including religious concepts that were common in early 19th century America. Anachronisms, references to things that would have been out of place in the ancient Americas, such as horses, cattle, steel, chariots, and silk, might be attributed to a translator's inattention, misapprehension, or use of loan words. Biblical phrases from both the Old and New Testament that are scattered throughout the text. Grant Hardy concludes here, whoever translated the Book of Mormon was very familiar with the King James Bible. And he goes on under this heading of the first theory A, Joseph-produced text. He continues, quote, the entire chapters that are reproduced from Isaiah, Micah, Malachi, and Matthew with only slight variations from the King James Version, even when that 1611 translation was in error. Of particular note are the changes made to the italicized words, which indicated translators' additions to the Hebrew or Greek in order to round out or clarify the English rendition. When the Book of Mormon quotes lengthy biblical passages, nearly 40% of the italicized words in the King James Version are changed, sometimes resulting in non-grammatical sentences, though such changes account for only 1/5 of the total variations. It is easy to imagine Joseph opening a Bible when he realized he had come to a long quotation and making such changes as he went along. It is harder to understand why a heavenly translator would have cared about King James Version italics. Continuing with the theory A, Joseph-produced text, quote, this is from Grant Hardy still, quote, the Lord's response in Doctrine and Covenants, section 9, verses 5 to 10, to Oliver Cowdery's failure to translate, may reflect Joseph's own practice. Quote, you have supposed that I would give it unto you when you took no thought, save it was to ask me. But behold, I say unto you that you must study it out in your mind, though it is also possible that this instruction applied only to Oliver, or that it referred to the gift of translation rather than the words themselves. Joseph's willingness to correct the style and grammar in the 1837 and 1840 editions. It does not appear that he regarded the original dictation as sacrosanct. Reference there to the many changes that Joseph himself made in the 1837 and 1840 editions, and of course subsequent editions have received also additional changes. Most of these are minor changes in grammar and usage, word usage, and so forth. Let's look now at the second theory, which is theory B, that a pre-existing text was given to Joseph by revelation. This is what Grant Hardy says about that in terms of looking for reasons to follow this particular theory. He says, quote, the extreme care taken in the dictation transcription process to get the words exactly right. The original manuscript shows that Joseph dictated in blocks of 20 to 30 words, with the scribe then reading the words back to him and making immediate corrections as Joseph detected errors. There are many such corrections, often involving distinctions that are difficult to hear without close attention, plurals, verb endings, and so forth, and that make little difference to the overall meaning of a sentence. Joseph spelling out difficult names at their first occurrence. Quite regularly, unfamiliar names were first spelled phonetically by the scribe and then immediately corrected, when Joseph apparently spelled them letter by letter. Emma Smith's testimony that Joseph could dictate for hours on end and would start each dictation session without reviewing where he had left off. Grant Hardy continues under this B heading of pre-existing text. Intratextual allusions in which distinct phrases from earlier stories are quoted in later episodes. One famous example is Alma's exact attributed quotation of 21 words spoken by Lehi, Alma 36:22, compared to 1 Nephi 1 verse 8. Which is especially interesting because Joseph dictated the quotation before the original source. After the loss of the 116 pages, Joseph continued dictating the books of Mosiah through Moroni before turning to 1 Nephi through the words of Mormon. Intricate literary patterns or rhetorical devices such as chiasmus, poetic parallelism, inclusios, and so forth. For instance, the complex chiasmus of Alma 36 appears to have been worked out beforehand in written form, and the inclusio that frames Alma's career is characterized by the repetition of distinctive phrases. Quote, "The number of their slain dead was not numbered because of the greatness of their number, with bodies cast into the waters of Sidon and in the depths of the sea." The presence of early modern English grammar and vocabulary usages that were obsolete by the early 19th century and did not appear in the King James Version. Some of the non-standard grammar in the Book of Mormon, much of which was updated in later editions, would have been acceptable in the 16th and 17th centuries, though the overall syntax of the book does not match any particular time or place in the development of the English language, including Joseph's native linguistic environment of 19th century New York. Many of the particularities of Book of Mormon diction would have been foreign to Joseph. And finally, Grant Hardy puts forth this final reason under this B heading, a pre-existing text given to Joseph by revelation. He says, quote, "The presumption in the 1830 preface and Doctrine and Covenants 10 verses 6 to 19 that Joseph could have retranslated the lost 116 pages and produced exactly the same words. He was forbidden to do so because those who had stolen the manuscript would have changed the words so that the original and retranslated versions did not match." And finally, the Book of Mormon itself suggesting that its future translator would read the words, 2 Nephi 27:19 to 26. So there you have it. This is what Grant Hardy has researched. Now, we should say that Grant Hardy and Terrell Givens and other scholars that have been referenced in this particular episode on the Book of Mormon translation. These are people who have spent much of their whole working lives professionally researching and looking into all the documentation that associated to Joseph Smith's life and to the translation of the Book of Mormon. That doesn't necessarily mean that they are right in what they're saying, and bear in mind that these are theories that are kind of swirling around and put around as to how the Book of Mormon was translated. Grant Hardy says in conclusion here, he says, quote, "This list does not negate the previous one, but it complicates it, and so far neither translation theory has proven entirely satisfactory. both explain some features of the text while passing over others, or introduce new conundrums. While a pre-existing translation may have been either free or literal, it is unlikely that Joseph's own improvised language would have yielded such precise literary patterns. On the other hand, if the translation came fully formed as a word-for-word revelation from God, why wasn't it lovelier, more elevated, or a better fit for modern English? So these questions that Grant Hardy concludes with will no doubt ring in our ears as we leave this subject. I think, in my opinion, it is difficult to know with great certainty how the Book of Mormon was translated. Joseph's phrase that it was translated by the gift and power of God, it may be as close as we will ever get to it. Will we ever know precisely exactly how it was done? I don't think we will. If we get into a kind of a debate about whether it was through interpreters or whether it was through a seer stone, I don't think that's very helpful, because those are either or arguments that don't really stack up. It's very possible that Joseph Smith used a wide variety of methodologies to translate the Book of Mormon, including the interpreters, including the seer stones, and including receiving feelings and thoughts and revelations into his own mind. And so I think it's probably a mistake to get terribly bent out of shape if we don't really know the answer to all of these questions. Thank you very much for watching this 7th episode of Church History Insights and Questions, the Book of Mormon translation. If you liked this presentation, please, if you could like it below and comment below and subscribe below, that would be very helpful. If you have any questions that you would like to get an airing to, please send your questions on an email to chiq1830@gmail.com. That's chiq1830@gmail.com. Thanks very much for your time today.